We are your brothers of space and time, who come extending the hand of friendship to greet our cosmic neighbors. We have watched from afar as you deal with the growing pains of your young race. We see you are moving to a higher level of understanding in accordance with cosmic law. You are on the threshold of joining us on the universal journey, and we wait patiently for this momentous step in your evolutionary progress.
Hidden deep on the internet is a mysterious website known as www.heavenlyangels.org. Even if you've never heard of it, one look at the site shows it comes from the early web. Its graphic design is eye-catching to say the least, but more fascinating are these lengthy and usually cryptic passages about Saurians, UFOs, and a space commander named Ashtar Sheran. These all seem to be tied to a group now known simply as the Universe People. So how does one begin to unpack the anomaly that is Ashtar Sheran? Where did the stories about him come from? And why did the Universe People revere him so much? It was just after World War II. Ufology was a fast-growing hobby in the United States and around the world thanks to more affordable radio and electronic equipment. One of the earliest fanatics was a man named George Van Tassel. His interest began after he befriended an eccentric German immigrant named Frank Kritzer, who was obsessed with UFOs. Mr. Kritzer was killed under mysterious circumstances in his underground bunker near Giant Rock, California. Giant Rock was a sacred Native American territory, quickly becoming a growing hotspot for UFO sightings. After Mr. Kritzer's death, Mr. Van Tassel took over his work and relocated his family to Giant Rock, where in 1952 he claimed to have made first contact with an alien calling himself Ashtar. On July 18th, he claimed to have channeled a telepathic message which reads in part, quote, "Hail to you, beings of Shan. I greet you in love and peace. My identity is Ashtar, Commandant Quadra Sector. Patrol Station Share. All projections, all waves. Greetings through the Council of the Seven Lights. You have been brought here inspired with the inner light to help your fellow man. You are mortals, and other mortals can only understand that which their fellow man can understand. The purpose of this organization is, in a sense, to save mankind from himself. Some years ago, your time, your nuclear physicists penetrated the Book of Knowledge. They discovered how to explode the atom." The rest goes on as a standard anti-nuclear war message. In the following weeks, Ashtar Sheran supposedly kept in touch with George Van Tassel. These follow-ups were filled with technobabble and vague prophecies, as well as talk of Ashtar's love and benevolence. Such extraterrestrial messages apparently continued through 1953, but one would soon motivate Mr. Van Tassel like no other. Mr. Van Tassel says he was in touch with a list of other aliens around this time, though he viewed Ashtar as both the most powerful and most prolific. After weeks of meditating in the Mojave Desert, Mr. Van Tassel believed he made face-to-face contact with an alien from the planet Venus. This new visitor was named Solganda, and is said to have taught Mr. Van Tassel skills like healing and time travel. The experience inspired him to start building the Integratron, a dome-shaped structure he believed was capable of cell rejuvenation. The Integratron's frame was built of an exposed wood, as Solganda had apparently warned Mr. Van Tassel against using any kind of metal inside. The result, taking over 2 decades to complete, was an architecturally sound and acoustically perfect building. Through the years, this was paid for by Mr. Van Tassel's year-round seminars and conventions on alien life, along with a considerable number of books written about the topic. Ashtar was becoming especially popular within the UFO community. Rumblings of an Ashtar command went as far back as the mid-1950s, but these didn't come from Mr. Van Tassel. In fact, he was quite against the commercialization of his encounters. One of Mr. Van Tassel's friends, Bob Short, formed a breakaway group which dubbed itself Ashtar Command. Mr. Short joined a growing list of people who believed they too could channel Ashtar Sheran. The content of new Ashtar messages varied depending on who was channeling them, but they were almost invariably political. For instance, Ethel P. Hill's book In Days to Come describes a universal law with a demand for total world peace. Ashtar seemed to take on the role as the savior of mankind, a theme increasingly reflected in channelings. The book concluded with a warning of an apocalyptic scenario where only the humans who take Ashtar's side in an upcoming universal conflict will receive salvation. Sometimes Mr. Short and his wife had offered to channel Ashtar for a small fee at conventions, giving UFO enthusiasts a chance to speak with the commander. Other authors built on the growing lore of Ashtar, adding concepts like his massive space armada. But this came with its own problems. As the Ashtar character became more popular, what Mr. Short wrote was no longer considered definitive. In fact, the many failed prophecies he made lost him credibility amongst ufologists. George Van Tassel, meanwhile, had been busy working on the Integratron when he died unexpectedly in 1978 before it was fully finished. Despite these troubles, this was far from the end for the alien commandant Ashtar, whose legend was just taking off.
But, he says, there are conditions. These include stopping the execution of all captured prisoners of war, allowing Giro to take negotiations, being arrested. In Australia, Mr. Perry Packer's cricketers are still pleading about yesterday's High Court decision, which lifts the ban on them playing in Test matches.
This is the voice of Kumar, representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you. For many years you have seen us as lights in the skies. We speak to you now to service them as we have done to your brothers and sisters all over this, your planet Earth.
1977's Southern Television broadcast interruption in the United Kingdom was supposedly done at the behest of Ashtar Command, with local newspapers transcribing the alien transmission. The usual themes like pacifism and the age of Aquarius were discussed. That same year, a woman named Thelma B. Terrell became the latest to say she made contact with Ashtar. She published her communications in periodicals, adding a few new details to the Ashtar story. First, Ashtar Command was said to be a fleet that was circling and monitoring the planet Earth. Tuella, as she was known, became the latest arbiter of Ashtar's wisdom and influence. Most notably, she began including elements of New Age mysticism and theosophy. With her broader vision of what Ashtar meant for the human race, she spent the next few years shoring up support in the UFO community, eclipsing that of both George Van Tassel and Bob Short. Through the late 70s, she circulated a text called Project World Evacuation, which claimed the fleets would soon rescue a handful of humans from imminent destruction. The prophecy reads in part, quote, "Our rescue ships will be able to come in close enough to the twinkling of an eye to set the lifting beams in operation in a moment. And all over the globe where events warrant it, this will be the method of evacuation. Mankind will be lifted, levitated we shall say, by the beams from our smaller ships. These smaller craft will in turn taxi the persons to the larger ships overhead, higher in the atmosphere, where there is ample space and quarters and supplies for millions of people." After Tuella's predicted conflict had passed, the faithful would return to a newly utopian Earth. Project World Evacuation was later published as a book in 1982. The telltale signs of this great evacuation would be the tilting of the Earth's axis. Those who've studied Tuella in detail note more overtones of Christian imagery in her predictions, which focus on the theme of salvation. She also began presenting herself as an extraterrestrial using the body of a human, hence the name change. Ashtar's popularity was by now well known in the contactee community, but not all attention was positive. A Swiss man named Billy Meyer had been trying to promote his own claims of meeting aliens, and was quickly becoming seen as a fraud amongst ufologists. Using photographs of performers on a television playing the Dean Martin show, he claimed to have met aliens named Askat and Ptah. The picture he used of Askat was really just the musician Michel Delafave. In 1983, Billy Meyer believed followers of Ashtar Sheran were out to kill him using artificially created lightning. This was supposedly out of revenge for the death of Ashtar Sheran, who Billy says was part of a different organization called Giza Intelligence. Ashtar, also known as Arusiak, apparently died in a failed attack on Askat's homeworld. Billy believes Ashtar was an evil warlord who got what he deserved. But this intergalactic drama didn't line up with what Tuella was writing. She kept Ashtar alive with a handful of new books about the latest encounters. Her predictions became more abstract to account for certain omens not coming true. Tuella also took a more spiritual approach to describing Ashtar and company. By 1985, her version of the story had changed considerably from what was first described in the 1950s. This incarnation of Ashtar belonged to the Intergalactic Council, said to be the highest on the spiritual hierarchy of the solar system. He became less of an alien visitor and more ethereal. It should be noted that Ashtar wasn't presented as entirely godlike, but rather an equal who was guiding humanity to enlightenment. He was supposedly from the planet Ashtar until he moved to Venus many centuries ago. In 1988, Tuella announced that Ashtar would be retiring until the Great Evacuation. Output reduced, but he was apparently still available for channeling as needed. Tuella died in September of 1993. While Tuella's career had been winding down, a new channeler named Yvonne Cole began warning fellow ufologists of yet another imminent space catastrophe threatening the human race. Making her earliest predictions in 1986, she believed that life on Earth was due to expire by 1994. To this end, she sought out her most faithful followers that she found most suitable for the roles Ashtar Sheran would need fulfilled upon visiting Earth. This included advisors and ambassadors, presumably for integrating mankind within the greater galactic biome. Mrs. Cole managed to attract many followers over the next 8 years, though her vision of the evacuation would go much differently than anticipated. In 1994, some Ashtar followers claimed that liftoff had begun. The Pioneer voyage used what was called physical vibration transfer to teleport faithful followers to the starships of the Galactic Fifth Command. What it really was a form of guided meditation meant to simulate such an experience, but it was touted early on as the real deal. This inspired up to 250 more UFO enthusiasts to come out for the next event to be held in December. Though the increased exposure meant more and more people were having their doubts about the veracity of alien encounters, this account of the Pioneer voyage gave the splintered Ashtar community something to rally around. At the same time, there was a rapidly growing technology emerging which could help bring order to the scattered Ashtar followers: the Internet. By the mid-1990s, most of the world was online. This coincided with a major social upheaval going on in Eastern Europe owing to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The Czech Republic was enjoying religious freedoms and outside ideas it hadn't experienced in most people's lifetimes. A Czech man by the name of Ivo Benda was working as a software engineer when he was introduced to the idea of extraterrestrial contact by a coworker around 1997. It seemed all too real to him. He too believed that Ashtar Sheran spoke with him telepathically while on the train home from work one night. Interest became an obsession as he quit his job to study alien life, changing his name to Ivo A. Benda, with the A standing for Ashtar. Mr. Benda now believed he was a recipient of interstellar messages from Ashtar Command like so many others, writing several books in Czech about it. He started giving public lectures to spread the word of Ashtar, which naturally included his own interpretation of galactic law and the meaning of life. Curiously, he believed Ashtar's people were in love with the cultural history of the Czech Republic. Mr. Benda believed in positive and negative energies emanating through the vibrations of all objects. He was adamant about this theory being the key to inner peace. Inspiring Mr. Benda were the works of Billy Meyer, who was notably an enemy of the Ashtar movement in the 1980s. When Mr. Meyer learned of this, he disavowed Mr. Benda. Undaunted, Mr. Benda went on to form an organization called the Universe People, made up of others who shared his New Age beliefs. Perhaps most infamously, Ivo Benda took his message to the World Wide Web with his now iconic Heavenly Angels website. This website has hardly changed since it went online around 1999, with its main page added to extensively over the past 2 decades. The result is a very long and difficult to understand dialogue filled with conspiracy theories about lizard people and Ashtar's role in the liberation of mankind. It is presumably the source of most images now associated with Ashtar Sheran, like the many recognizable computer-generated faces that come up when you search his name. But who created these images is difficult to pin down, since Mr. Benda has been in copyright troubles a number of times because of his belief that galactic copyrights supersede those here on Earth. The website has been translated into countless languages and boasts over 20 million downloads a month as of 2014. These downloads are likely the many PDF files offered filled with Mr. Benda's long-winded tirades about healthy eating. Quickly scrolling through the site also shows reverence for several other deities, like Jesus Christ, Ptah, and Asket. Thanks to Mr. Benda, Ashtar Sheran found new life across the world.
We are here to advise, guide, and encourage you to turn your eyes towards the creation of a planet of peace and understanding, where your invention and universal ability coexist with the creative force of the cosmos. We are your brothers of the Galactic Federation, who wish only to have you by our side.
Ivo Ashtar Benda didn't just stop with his flashy website. He was eager to share his message to whatever Czech media outlets would agree to speak with him, often with amusing results. News articles report that he would go door to door leaving flyers for people, rife with the same colorful graphics and conspiratorial messages as on the website. Mr. Benda believes that at least 80% of Czech households received his message. Though he certainly gained followers from the exposure, most simply dismissed him because of the more outlandish warnings about lizard people in an intergalactic war. Both became fixtures of the Benda brand of Ashtar Sheran worship. His most famous stunt was declaring that he would host the first World Symposium on Love, which would take place at Prague Castle with the approval of President Václav Havel. He was hoping the president would use his clout to have figures like President Bill Clinton at the summit. President Havel never gave his approval though, and it didn't happen. Mr. Benda was increasingly apprehensive about new technologies, believing them to be a form of mind control. Implanted chips were the source of his biggest anxieties. But this didn't stop more and more people from coming around to the increasingly outrageous ideas the universe people proposed. This was in part because of Mr. Benda's incorporation of Christian mysticism in the writings, pandering to a wider religious demographic. His activities into the new millennium were enough to catch the attention of Czech authorities. They were especially concerned in the wake of the recent Heaven's Gate incident, where 39 members of an American UFO cult had participated in mass suicide. Internal government reports note a concern with his ideas that money should be abolished, unsurprising for a former bloc country. Also noted is his consistent use of negative media attention to promote the idea of a conspiracy against the universe people. Increasingly erratic messages purportedly coming from Ashtar tied the September 11th attacks to interdimensional forces, amongst other things. The website also hosted several lengthy texts authored by Mr. Benda called Talks with Teachings from My Cosmic Friends. In addition to drawn-out messages of love and how to live, we learn that Ashtar Sheran is not head of the Galactic Council, but that he works for a higher being named Gorlaj. America and the world were seen as being under siege by reptilians, and Mr. Benda warns that the Czech Republic was next. Mr. Benda managed to have members of his sect get a picture with the new Czech president, Václav Klaus. More attention meant that the universe people were subject to widespread ridicule, most originating online. Their website was hacked a handful of times. Usually the images were replaced by pictures of the Teletubbies or swastikas. And like past incarnations of Ashtar Sheran worshippers, they were rejected by the larger UFO and extraterrestrial research community. But this couldn't stop the followers of Ashtar Sheran. Soon Mr. Benda would expand Ashtar's presence in other Eastern European countries, namely Slovakia and Poland. News sources in Slovakia and Poland wrote of the same literature handouts popping up in mailboxes across the countries, albeit poorly translated into the local dialect. The biggest incident involving the group happened around 2007, when Mr. Benda sent a package to the Ministry of Defense. The contents were considered suspicious to military police, who ordered the building it arrived in be evacuated. In the end, what Mr. Benda sent were instructions on how the government could defend itself against a reptilian invasion. In Ivo Benda's words, if you were attacked by a reptile from an outer world, would the Ministry of Defense defend the people? Or do you consider those reptiles as friends? An official Facebook was linked on the website in the mid-2010s, but it hasn't been updated much since 2016. As of 2017, Ivo Benda was living quietly with his partner in a Slovakian apartment. He still believes microchips embedded in modern technology like microwaves are the work of dark intergalactic forces. Occasionally he gives interviews to Czech publications, discussing the same topics he has been for the last 2 decades. But other than that, things have been mostly quiet from the universe people. The website is still functional, with a donation link that Mr. Benda insists is only for the upkeep of the page and printing new tracks. Most recently, a video has been put out by Ashtar followers of Mr. Benda supposedly channeling the intergalactic entity once more. Set to music from Blade Runner, the message links the 2020 global health crisis to dark reptilian forces, likening the situation to the Matrix movies. It was capped off with a reminder about eating leafy greens to stay healthy, and that if the situation becomes too grim, the alien forces will spirit faithful universe people to the heavens. Though eccentric, Ashtar Sheran believers and the universe people have been relatively harmless movements compared to some of the more notable New Age philosophies. Ashtar doesn't seem to have ever been just one person, making it more incredible that such an intense cult of personality has survived over 6 decades. The Integratron still stands today, though ownership has passed to a trio of sisters who wanted to make its unique acoustic design available for the public. It can be intoxicating to want to believe in heavenly figures who can solve our earthly problems, even if the logistics of this are baloney. Still, it seems unlikely that Ashtar Sheran's following will disappear anytime soon,